1, 2, 1, 2. Well, that was a way of quietening the room, wasn't it? I think we're ready, aren't we? It's gone 11 o'clock. Everybody's here on the panel, and everybody's here in the room. Welcome to the Cybersecurity panel at the Bled Strategic Forum. I'm obliged, as moderator, to plug Attendify, the official app of the conference. If I don't do that, they won't pay my hotel bill. So please install Attendify and interact with your fellow delegates. So, is the technology working, Miran? Technology is working. It would be awkward if it didn't. Is that how you want it? There we go. So I think Leon Trotsky put it best. You may not be interested in cybersecurity, but cybersecurity is interested in you. We live in a time where the slip of a click of a mouse can send a company into meltdown. It can, as the UK found out, paralyze a health service. Did anybody fly here on British Airways, perhaps? Because if you did, it would be slightly worrying for your personal data. Every week seems to bring news of a new data breach. NATO has now declared cyberspace as the fifth arena for defense alongside land, sea, air, and space. And it's obviously an important subject to individuals, to corporations, to military and alliances all over the globe. The fact that you're here does indeed indicate that you are interested in cybersecurity. Leon Trotsky would be proud of you. So I'd just like to ask, with a quick show of hands, how many people here would consider themselves to be well-versed in the field? Cybersecurity ninjas, if you please. Any cybersecurity ninjas? There is a few back here, but any forward of the stage? And is there anyone who consider themselves a complete neophyte when it comes to cybersecurity? And so we're all somewhere in the middle. We know something, but we're going to learn a lot from the experts on the panel today. We do have a panel of all the talents. We have cybersecurity experts who've helped to build the defenses of small, nimble, digital-savvy countries, people who work with NATO and the United States, and of course we have the private sector represented as well. There are all these different actors that need to work together on cybersecurity. And cybersecurity really presents a unique challenge when it comes to defense. Not only is the infrastructure largely in private hands, but there are no borders, no traditional borders to defend. So it's a completely different paradigm. I'd like to get into the introduction, starting off with myself. You can see who I am. And we're going to do the introductions by way of a game of Have I Been Owned? You may be familiar with the website Have I Been Owned? You can enter your email address into it, and it tells you if your email address has been leaked in a data breach and whether you're potentially vulnerable to the loss of your data or to be targeted by hackers. As we can see, I have, I'm afraid, very much been owned. Owned on 2 breached sites, one of which was LinkedIn, which was victim of a massive hack a few years ago. Dropbox, another service many people use, which has been hacked. Yahoo, of course. And just to keep us all on our toes, I'm going to go through the entire panel. We have put all of your email addresses into Have I Been Owned? So I think now it's time to see how good the email hygiene of our panelists truly is. So, Major General Dogran Bozic, Director of the Office of the Government of the Republic of Slovenia for the Protection of Classified Information. Have you been owned, Dogran?
Yes, actually I've been, yeah.
But this address that we've got you on, good news. Absolutely no ponage found. So
that's our official address.
This I think is the key. You've obviously been very careful with your official address. And let's move on to Colonel Jerry Chappie, Deputy Director, Joint Cyber Center, Europe Command, United States of America. Jerry, do you think you've been owned?
More than likely.
But not this address. I'm now feeling very poor in terms of my cyber hygiene. Over to the private sector. Kai Hermsen, Global Coordinator for the Charter of Trust at Siemens. How confident are you feeling, Kai?
I think the work email, probably not. Private email, probably yes.
Should we put it to the test?
Yes.
Very good. Kai is clean and healthy.
That's the official one. Yeah, the private one.
I'm starting to draw lessons from this already. Be very, very careful what you do with your official
in the end,
address.
who has only one email address, right? If you're, that's maybe one hint.
Mitja Jerman, Head of Center for Knowledge at Josef Stefan Institute in Slovenia. Mitja, how are you feeling?
Oh, certainly I've been, it's academia, so we are all transparent and open.
But are you too open, Mitja? Let's see. Uh-oh. Mitja has been owned on 5 breached sites. In some ways, Mitja is the winner so far. Can you think what they might be?
So with all the emails I've got, probably yes.
And let's move on. Antonio Misiroli, Assistant Secretary General for Emerging Security Challenges at NATO. Antonio, I would imagine you'd be feeling very confident. Oh, beg your pardon.
Well, I have to trust my colleagues, first of all. Privately is a different matter, but I'm not aware so far of any such.
You trust your colleagues? Your trust is well placed. We all breathe a sigh of relief. Our Israeli security expert, Uzi can you pronounce your surname for me?
Moscovici.
Thank you, Uzi. A Major General, a Vice President, retired, Vice President of Missile Division at Israel Aerospace Industries. You've seen how the panel has gone. Israel renowned for its prowess in cybersecurity. You're feeling confident?
I hope my email has been reached.
You hope it has?
Yeah, because I make usage of the assumption that it has been used.
Ah.
It has been reached.
An interesting strategy. But it's bad news for you. And I think we have one last email to check. Gregor. Again, in the private
I hope I win. So I have to beat 5, I think.
You have to beat 5.
Yeah.
Are you private sector, work with startups?
Yeah, so not too interesting.
It's obviously a different
So
sort of...
it will be tough to beat.
Let's see. So Gregor Pipan is the chief executive of X-Lab in Slovenia. And you have been owned, but you're not the winner. Only on 3 sites, Gregor.
I will do the best next time.
So as we can see, I mean, it obviously it's just a little bit of fun and games, but potentially...
You can send one another malwares on the net. See next year who's the winner.
Potentially, if you've got one main email address you use for everything, and the same password you use for everything, I mean, this is baby steps. I'm sure pretty much everybody in this room knows this, but think of the times that you've sent passport information in your email. Think of the times that you've sent bank account information in your email. Does your email address have the same password as whatever website has just been hacked? You're in trouble. They've got everything. And a colleague of mine, journalist colleague, was phished in just this way. And luckily the person who phished them didn't realize that this colleague had been in contact with dozens upon dozens of sensitive sources in the Middle East whose lives would have been endangered if the person who'd hacked them had dug deep enough into their files. So the danger even to, you might not think that journalists are that important, but your lives can depend on it sometimes. And it's a responsibility. Now I wanted to go around the panel and ask everybody for a quick 30-second thought on cybersecurity. And I wanted to open with my own, which is, I've asked you to install Attendify. I've asked you to trust Attendify, in essence. You're putting that on your mobile device. You don't know quite how it's getting busy on there. And we've all been trained over, say, the past decades or so, to trust social media, to trust the apps that we use on our phones, to trust the websites that we do business with, to trust many things which are found in cyberspace, whether it's e-commerce, messaging services, personal assistants. Has anybody got Alexa? I wouldn't, personally, but there we are. And cybersecurity, in many ways, I think, to the individual, now seems entirely counterintuitive because we've been trained, socialized to trust. And for me, that's problematic when you're thinking about the overall strategy, achieving resilience on national and international levels, when individuals have maybe been taught to trust that little too much. So I will retire, and I would like to go down the panel, maybe starting at the end with Mitya, and you could all give me your 30-second thoughts on cybersecurity.
Well, cyber criminal is there and it will go on, so it's an issue. And there are 2 things which are important. So first is personal behavior, personal attitude, and the other one, this is collective action. So you cannot fight that alone. It's impossible, so that would mean that we would need to really think how we can collaborate together in various aspects of cybersecurity.
Uzi.
Thank you. I'd like to throw in 2 ideas. This is 15 seconds per idea, and I've already consumed 5 or 7 seconds. The first of which would be what is the right or what is the best way to create, endorse, augment, sometimes enforce a national ecosystem to be created cyber-wise. That means an orchestration of the actions, not the intentions, the actions of the defense and security community, the private sector, the academia and education system, and the government. And the second thought I like to throw in is the term which the term of cybernetic sovereignty?
There is plenty of room to sit down over here if people would like to take seats. And we can move on to Kai. No, sorry, Tana, beg your pardon, Tana.
Thank you. I'm the Estonian guy on the panel here, and I'm glad you didn't test my email address, although I'm quite sure it's not been done. But at least Estonia's reputation is safeguarded right now. The point that I wanted to make is that cyber, you hear so many politicians saying that cyber is important, but not many politicians really understand why is it important. It's a sexy topic, everybody wants to talk about this, but usually what happens is that they say that, yes, cyber is important, let's take another topic. And on too many occasions that happens. So we need to really do something about this and make the politicians also understand that it is their responsibility and to understand what are the effects and how these effects can have an implication on the daily life.
Thank you. Dobra.
Thank you. I was thinking why we are talking about cyber at all. And probably we are talking about cyber because the whole economy that is going on right now, it's on cyber. So without cyber, there is no economy. So because of that, probably because of economy, we are talking about the cyber. And when we talk about the investments, big companies and institutions, they don't want to come in the countries without cybersecurity. So probably that's connected, and we are talking about cyber because it's important for the economy. And on the national level, why is important? We put the article that probably the hacking society is the major step that can happen in one state, country, or in the region. So hacking society and splitting society in two parts is probably, and it's easy achievable by cyber means. It's the hardest that we can expect.
Thank you. Antonio.
Well, cybersecurity is a team sport. It is a team sport at national level because it requires a whole of government approach. It is a team sport at multinational level, between EU, NATO, UN, OSCE, any other multilateral framework. It is a team sport between the public sector, because without cooperation and trust between public and private sector, it is impossible to be effective. It is also a defensive sport, or a predominantly defensive sport, because the advantage is normally with the offense. But of course, increasingly, the dividing line between offense and defense is being blurred. It is not like American football, where you have a team for defense and a team for offense. It is more like basketball, perhaps. And I know how popular basketball is in this country and this region. Barack Obama, who was a notorious basketball fan, used to compare cybersecurity to a game of hoops. You know the movie White Man Can't Jump? Defense and offense are only one shot away from one another.
Thank you, Antonio. Jerry.
And not only is cybersecurity a team sport, it's also a cultural change that we're going to have to start making as we start moving forward down this development of the internet and everything else that we have. One of the big things that we see across the board is that those of us that have grown up in it, and those of us that have seen it, and those of us that believe that we know everything about it are going to be the primary targets. Those that believe that we're smarter than the hackers and smarter than this, smarter than somebody else, believe that we're technically invincible or something else. We've found up here that some of the things that we're actually doing, we're doing right, but there's a lot of folks out there that those are the primary targets that are going to be in the near future. Those that believe that they're smarter than the adversaries are going to be those that are going to be owned. So changing the culture to realize that all of us are needing to improve our defenses. We need to improve our cyber hygiene on all the websites that we go to, on what we do on a day in and day out basis. What it is that we actually install from the App Store and from iTunes and all the other stuff, we need to make sure that we are actually validating all of those details and stuff on it. So all of us have to improve our cybersecurity hygiene, and there's teams and teams and teams of people that are trying to get into our stuff on a daily basis. So as we try and improve our culture, we need to also improve our daily cyber hygiene.
Thank you, Jerry. Kai.
Well, I can only second everything that has been said so far. From a private perspective, so as a big company, we see cybersecurity as something like climate change because it transcends countries, it transcends industries, it transcends everybody. It's a matter of society in the end. So it matters for everybody. What does that mean? Jerry, what you said, if you stand still and you don't do something about it, you're not active, this is your biggest vulnerability already. So you need to be active. So we're seeing we want to up our game on this. We want to be much more active. And still we're not 100% secure because we will never be. It's frustrating. But we try to see this as an opportunity, and we also try to collaborate as much as we can, though being a very big company with, we already have 370,000 people in the company we can discuss with. This is not enough. We're not smart enough to do this on our own. So we need to collaborate with other companies, public stakeholders, society at large. And I think that's, whoever does not take action and does this together with others has already lost this game that we play.
Thank you, Carl. Gregor, you've either got the easiest or the hardest job coming last.
I agree with everybody. So, joking aside, let's say when first thought on cybersecurity, you think about military, hard to penetrate targets that attackers who are trying to obtain some classified information. This is what we see in the movies. But actually, in reality, most vulnerable peoples are every Joe with credit card numbers, with social security, whatever. So there is a lot of places on the internet where databases are being collected with this kind of informations for criminals to exploit that. And maybe this is something that we don't realize, that it's not just special critical infrastructure which is being targeted, but everybody's being targeted. And second thought would be that before we were thinking, okay, when I'm at home, I'm private. But today you're not. Google knows that you're at home. You have Google phone, so. And it says, okay, now it's time to leave for work, because usually you need to be at 9 o'clock in the office. So it knows where your office is, and there's traffic on the way. So this just tells you what information is being collected about you without your, let's say, explicit knowledge or confirmation.
Thank you. We've concentrated so far a lot. We've heard a lot from the panel about the personal aspect of cybersecurity, and certainly it's something I guess that most of us can relate to very easily. But I do want to make sure that we cover the strategic aspect of this as well. And Dobran, I know you're particularly concerned about, I suppose, one of the big questions: how governments can be in control of cybersecurity when so much of that depends on private or corporate actors.
That it's right. So I think 90% of cyberspace is owned by the private company, 90%. And so on the other side, there is a government importance and need to control the space. It's a national security issue. And I think it's first we have to define who is who in the zoo, not just in the country and outside of the country. When my previous position, I was Chief of Defense, I knew who to call in Estonia. Now probably I have to call my colleague that is in the Ministry of Economical Department. So I don't know who to call in the United States maybe, or maybe Germany or Croatia. So probably we have to unify that system. And on the other side, and if it's a team sport, we have to know who is a captain anyway, who is a captain and who is a coach. And on the other side, probably we have to have some kind of law. We talk about the previous, we have law of sea, for example. Probably we have to have some kind of law for cyberspace to define that. And overall, we have to recognize that it's not responsibility of IT experts at the IT department. It's responsibility for the CEOs in the company, and the prime minister and the head of the state on the national level. It's not the IT experts' responsibility. We have to take on the top level that responsibility.
I'm very interested to hear Tanel and Uzi's experience, because you've both been intimately involved in structuring your country's cyber defenses. How have you found the cooperation between national actors, governments, defense forces, and the private sector to work in Estonia and Israel?
Well, I will start here. For Estonia, first of all, a major news flash that we had on 1st of August was that we did establish our own cyber command. So I do believe we are now the smallest country to have a separate command like this. But this was really derived from practical needs to make sure that we are as efficient as possible in our cyber defenses. But the role of private sector here is crucial, because we do rely on different services that come from the private sector, and we couldn't think of any other way. And another point that I really want to make here is that there's a lot of talk also about the workforce and how to retain people. We have now really taken an approach that there's no need to fight the fact that the private sector will buy off the experts from the government sector. That's a fact. So there's no point in fighting a fact. Rather, what we really try to do is create this ecosystem where we actually train cyber experts and we let them go. So that we can also train experts for the private sector. And they would go there anyhow. But with that, we can also guarantee, or at least ease the willingness of these people to come back to the government sector afterwards, whenever they want. Or on a volunteer basis, they can provide their expertise to us.
Has there been a smooth cooperation with the private sector in Israel, Uzi?
I'd like first of all to say that there is no recipe. There's no recipe with 5, 7, 10 easy steps that tells you how to create a national ecosystem, and whatever works in a given nation doesn't work. It has to fit the local, I would say, the local political culture of the specific nation. If you are in a continuous special position at the national level, like Israel, then a certain solution that would fit our local political culture won't go, for instance, in Estonia or in Sweden, some Scandinavian country, or across the Atlantic. So this is one general statement. I would like, with your permission, to say that in accordance to what Dobran said, I mean, defining who is who in the zoo, we have to define who are not the only, but the most prominent players on the playground, and there are 4 players. There is the defense and the security community. There is the government. This is where governmental agencies end. There is the academia, and there is the private sector. And academia and private sector, unless this is a dictatorship, are free to act in accordance to their own will. If someone expects that a national ecosystem would be created without the intervention of the first 2 players I've mentioned, that means the defense and security community. This is not an intervention, this is an influence or a participation, and an intervention, an active intervention by the government, then I think this is naivety. There won't be any hidden hand, any laissez-faire within the process of creating a national ecosystem. So the government, and this is very simplistic and in a nutshell, the government has to issue or has to fulfill its role in governance, in legislation, and in regulation, because if there is no legislation and regulation, there can be no demand for compliance. The defense and security community has to contribute, has to be a participant, has to be a player. And the private sector and the academia, some of it has to be given to them as I've said, regulation, legislation, enforcement of compliance. Some of it has to be endorsed by the government. For instance, and this would be my last sentence, I believe that one of the common denominators in mentioning the difficulties that there are in creating such an ecosystem is the scarcity of skilled manpower. In Israel, we don't suffer, so to speak, from this kind of a problem because we have compulsory service, and each and every year you have an influx of very trained and very skillful and professional manpower coming from the military, retiring after their compulsory service, to the industry and to the academia. But say, for instance, there is no compulsory service, and this is the situation in most of the world's nations. That means that this influx of people has to be endorsed, has to be augmented. At the beginning, maybe has to be created by the government. I throw in an idea. Say a government would like to have a 5 to 7 years process in which a reservoir of skilled manpower in the fields of cyber has to be created. Let everyone who goes to study cyber studies and computer science study for free, maybe even get some money, and the money will be paid 50% by the government and 50% by the industry. In turn, the graduates would obligate themselves to work 5 years, as an example, in the industry that financed 50% out of their study cost. Is this a refuted idea? I think not.
And indeed, it's worth pointing out, Forbes estimates that there'll be a skills gap in cybersecurity to the tune of 3.5 million vacant positions by 2021. So that's just 3 years' time. 3.5 million vacant positions. So I know what I'll be advising my children to do. It's only fair to give the private sector a say. I mean, Kai and Gregor, you've been listening intently, I'm sure. I mean, Gregor, of course, you're from much more dealing with fast-moving startups. Kai, with one of the world's longest established, biggest companies. How do you feel that this partnership, this team play, works for you?
Well, for me, for us, it's absolutely clear that we need this kind of a collaboration. We need to work together. We also accept our role as a company, and as a company also working together with 15 other companies in an initiative that we formulated, to be much more active and to actively drive the change, and maybe even see cybersecurity as an opportunity for something bigger, for something that we call digitalization, because we want to see and want to maybe also change the narrative on cybersecurity a little bit, take it away from, let's say, a little bit from the defense side of things towards it's also an enabler, it's the license to actually, it's the license for our digital future. And I mean, probably most of the people here in the room would agree that somehow our future will be digital. It is already becoming more and more digital. So we see this as an opportunity. If we get cybersecurity right, and then there's a lot of other opportunities built on top of that. That's our driving force, and that's how we tackle it, and why it is interesting for us as a company. And I very much liked your example of these emails you have just shown there, but today it already goes further. Even if you haven't used your email today, you are here in the room, you're making use of building automation systems. There's this device, maybe some of you can see it, where the stairs are. That is automated, that will become digital, or maybe already is. This hotel is newly renovated, so hopefully it is. This can be attacked. And so you can be victim of a cybersecurity attack without using anything that feels digital to you, by using infrastructure. And that's the change. That's, I think, the change in quality of cybersecurity. It's not just the quantity of attacks, it's a different quality. So there is no way of not working together and not being pragmatically working together. That's what we're trying to do. And we see that it is positively received from all sides, which I think is positive news.
Gregor.
Maybe just to connect a little bit on the automation part. So I don't know how many of you are aware that a few years ago they proved that you could actually interact with car braking system remotely, meaning that somebody driving by you could disable your brakes while you're driving your car. So this could be considered a cyber attack too. So this is one of the possible attacks that it could happen. But coming to the startups and small companies, a lot of people today, young people, are exposing their private life online in the cloud. And when they start the companies, they treat the company the same. Everything is in the cloud. Of course, they use Amazon Web Services, they use GitHub or public repositories for the code. They use probably different passwords, so they have some conscience that it's not good to use the same password in email for everything. So from this perspective, they are having tools to manage that, but those tools could be breached too. So at the end, let's say at the beginning, the company does not have any of value. So it's really not so much important to protect your assets because there are no assets to protect. Like it's a green field. There is no plant there still. But as the company grows, usually they start to hack the growth problem, how to attack the market, how to sell better, how to penetrate new countries, new domains. And people usually forget about security until it's usually too late.
Thank you very much, Gregor. I want to bring in particular, Jerry and Antonio now, because it's very clear that we need cooperation between industry, government, defense, but also cooperation among countries as well. So what does collective defense mean when it comes to cybersecurity? And maybe from the NATO point of view, you could handle this, Antonio.
Well, of course, NATO's mandate in this field is to some extent limited. It is mainly about protecting our own networks, including the military networks, both in Brussels and nearby, in the different agencies across the alliance, where operations take place, including Kosovo and so on and so forth. It is also about capacity building for allied countries, and in some cases also capacity building for partners. And there are in particular a few partners that is non-members of the alliance that are part of this conversation about capacity building. Capacity building matters because it is it is a team sport, and of course we are all vulnerable, and we are only as strong given as an alliance our weakest link, and therefore there is a special effort devoted to that. It is not just about sending a few people to a training course on cybersecurity for, say, one academic year. It is a long-term, long-distance run that has to be carried out. It is about education in school, it is about hygiene, and we have all to be aware that building up our own capacity in this field matters a lot. There are also some more specific dimensions to the military aspect of that, and I'm sure that Jerry will elaborate further on that. Let's compare cyberspace to airspace. To some extent, the large majority of traffic is civilian and commercial, and there is a smaller share of it that is military. It can be expanded depending on the security situation worldwide or in a specific region, but of course it is only part of it. And I think the comparison holds, but for one aspect, that airspace is much better regulated today than cyberspace is. It is both an issue of technological gaps. I mean, technologies go faster than regulation in this particular respect. But also, right now, I think it depends also on the international climate and the difficulty we have, is particular with some players out there, to find common ground in identifying, for instance, what is and what is not acceptable behavior in that field. There are different types of activities that are being carried out over there, hostile activities. Once upon a time, cyber was mainly used for, how could I put it, espionage, and even intellectual property theft, which was part of the game. Now it is increasingly into sabotage. Now, espionage is not forbidden by international law. Sabotage potentially is a casus belli. I mean, it could lead also to conflict in that particular aspect. And the dividing line between espionage and sabotage is now technologically and politically very thin. And I think we are all confronted with all the challenges that come with that, with the definitions of what a cyber attack is, and how invasive, pervasive, dangerous it could be, what could be the assessment of the consequences of a cyber attack, and how it would play also in the wider military context. Cyber is at the same time a domain in its own right, and it is an enabler for other military activities across the spectrum. And it is extremely complex and sometimes, how could I put it, very difficult even in political terms to allow for reaching a common assessment and common understanding of that.
Thank you. Jerry.
Okay, looking at it from the national side, there's some things that we need to figure out, comparing it with aviation and space and things. There's some ground rules that need to be developed, and that's one of the big issues that we don't have. speaking from a common framework, exactly how are we going to do that, and who do we hold responsible when and if an event happens? Because the problem with cyber espionage and cyber attacks and stuff, that the cost or entry into the program is extremely cheap. You can get laptops and things for pennies and dollars and whatever you want to call it. So entry into the cyberspace is very, very inexpensive compared to aviation or compared to space. So how do we actually create a baseline of this is what everybody should do, this is what everybody can't do, and then how do we hold people accountable? How do we hold governments and systems and private organizations accountable, and those that don't fall under any country or company or things or organizations? How to hold those personnel responsible? That's a really prickly problem we're trying to figure out. Then attribution is the other big problem. The flip side of that is, how do you know it was so-and-so that did this? So part of the ground rules that we need to figure out is, when an aircraft flies over, you can see the tail number on that aircraft. How do you do that from a cyber attack? There is no way to specifically attribute that attack came from that individual or that organization. That's something that we're really struggling with right now. We say that an organization did that to our whatever. Okay, how exactly do you know that? Because of the IP address. Okay, spoofing an IP address is, hell, my 13-year-old can do that. That's really easy. Oh, it's a MAC address. Well, MAC spoofing is really easy also. It's just a little bit, it's the next step from IP spoofing. So exactly how do you attribute where that attack came from? Do you try and follow it back through the Internet of Things, through the primary DNS servers and stuff around the globe? Well, that doesn't really work either, because that might have been the last hop that you're able to trace it back to. But in reality, it came from 3 hops before that. So the problem that we're really going to run into as a global community of this is how to determine attribution and how to create a baseline that everybody's comfortable and understands and realizes that there are teeth in that law. So when you speed, you get a picture of yourself going too fast. Well, we understand, okay, yep, that's me, and you have to pay it. How are we going to do that within cyberspace? How do we validate that that's the individual that did the attack, and how do we make them pay for whatever it was that they did?
Kai, can I just get to you in a second, because we haven't heard from Mitya yet, and I think your speciality, which is artificial intelligence, may come into bearing with what Jerry was talking about. A lot of people are maybe instinctively afraid of artificial intelligence, but in terms of cyber defense, it could be our new best friend.
Yeah, so AI is not just robots; it's a lot of other things as well. So, on one of the methods that we develop and that they are in development across the globe are actually these data-intensive methods, which means that if you have access to the data, you can do quite a lot of things on that. Because usually, people have the problem of understanding the complex systems, and this is the complex system. And this complex system has several dimensions, and one is time as well, so in the cause-effect diagram. So why this happened and who actually interfered and all this stuff. And usually we cannot process this amount of information, but the AI can do. And so certainly plenty of stuff we do already, so there are successful applications that actually can understand what is going on, can detect anomalies in the complex system, can see various elements interfering with not just internally but also with external information, and eventually it gives you quite a lot of good understanding of what is going on, but not just about understanding. Also we can also create systems that are actually proactive, so that the system itself will understand what is going on, have a little bit of awareness, and then react when there is something happening. So one of the stuff which is very relevant as well is that since if you have all of this information on disposal, this is what we are, when I said at the beginning, so we have to collaborate, it's about, whether we can have access to your data and your data, because this would actually mean to have a little bit more information about what are the potential threats or potential new scenarios to interfere with existing systems. And these methods can at least imagine what would be a potential scenario to interfere with something which is established existing system, and evaluate the potential threats on a particular scenario. And this is something which actually helps anybody to be better prepared than it is today to new threats, to what is going on, and eventually even to understand what these consequences is.
Thank you, Matthew. Kai. Can we have Kai's thought, because we did stop him before, but then we'll come to you, Antonio.
No worries. I just wanted to add to that kind of a discussion. What we see and what we find interesting from a company perspective is, or if beyond that, even an individual perspective. Now, the difficulty we will see in cybersecurity, I think, in the future, and also why we have to think about new approaches is, first of all, it's not bound to any geographic boundaries. You said that, I think, at the beginning, yet we are trying, the measures we see and how we regulated things were always geographic, because an airplane is flying over Slovenia, so Slovenia has probably responsibility to control it. Now, the cyber attack doesn't fly over Slovenia. You cannot even realize where it is. It's global by definition. So we need to challenge ourselves and think, how can we come up with local regulations on something that is global by definition? And that's also how we, as a company, work. It doesn't help us, actually, to be frankly honest, if we have regulations country by country on cybersecurity. That probably doesn't do any benefit to having more security. We need to find regulations that are global, that are transcending, maybe even like maybe it's something like World Trade Organization on cybersecurity that is regulating something. I know these times are difficult to even get on the same page on the most trivial things, but that's why it's like climate change. It's a delicate matter. And then building on the AI kind of thing, we will also have to accept that the matter of cybersecurity does not necessarily involve individuals. So in the past, like speeding ticket, there's somebody in the car that I can hold liable. Now, if you have a fridge at home that is smart home enabled and it all of a sudden mines cryptocurrencies, who is liable? And you don't even mind because your butter is still cold. So why would you care? But maybe somebody cares, be it the state or somebody else. Who is liable? It's not an individual doing anything. So we have to move on from this. There's a bad guy sitting in the basement doing tricky stuff. That's what we see in the movies. We will see cyber attacks that are maybe not even attributable to an individual. Plus, on the other side, we will also see a lot of intelligence that's not attached to an individual. So we somehow have to find ways to cope with that. And that's why we have to rethink fundamentally the rules and regulations and maybe even some ideas of politics on which our society is built. That's the difference, I think.
Antonio first, please.
I wanted to add a couple of points on automation and machine learning. On the one hand, this highlights also one of the dilemmas of cybersecurity. On the one hand, technology is developing so fast that public policy cannot really cope with that, and we still don't know exactly what are the possible consequences, intended and unintended, of new technological development there. And on the other hand, of course, the architecture of the internet is not easy to change, especially if we want to keep it open and accessible. So I think that, there is an architecture that is there, but technology is to some extent trumping everything, and we still don't know exactly where it leads. And on, in particular, security applications in that field of artificial intelligence, it is evident that in terms of situational awareness, it is a net advantage to use AI. It is much easier, for instance, to track anomalous behavior on the web. And therefore, that is the first step towards identifying and detecting hostile activities. On the other hand, I'm told in particular by military planners that whenever artificial intelligence has been applied in a more active format, offensive, if you like, it tends to display escalatory behavior. And we want to retain a degree of control in a crisis over where things could go. And I think that is still something we are struggling with, and it's very difficult to find a one-size-fits-all solution.
And we'll have Gregor, and then I want to take a little visual break. So Gregor.
Okay, just to relate to Jerry and Kai here, it's the speeding tickets. This is possible today. So today you can buy Botnet online, which will attack any target you wanted to attack, which is Botnet was not set up by you. You just bought it. probably for Bitcoin or whatever. You get access, you log in, you say what you want it to do, you log out, and after a while, the attacks is starting to come from, I don't know, China, wherever, and you cannot detect the source of the attack. So this is possible today, so we don't have to wait to see it.
I think it's very interesting what we've heard very briefly about the Internet of Things. Just to give you a little example of where we could be with this. My phone there is 3.5 years old. I was told the new BBC email application only works on Android 6 and above. That's on Android 5. I put Android 7 onto it, and the BBC app says your phone has been compromised. So I know because I compromised it. But new phone coming up. I can solve that. There's an issue. It's raised. We tend to change our phones every 1, 2, 3 years. We do that. A lot of us are locked into contracts. Your beautiful Siemens Bosch appliances, I know from personal experience, a Bosch dishwasher or a washing machine can last for 20 years.
It's not a bad job.
Mark Hanning, CEO of Qualicart, set to report earnings after their blockbuster IPO.
So you consider this a job?
I put a lot of work into this. I'm not lazy. It takes research to figure out the key players, learn all about them, their families, their friends, what they care about. You have to understand the company's organization. I get a lot of my information from the sales department because they're always so quick and eager. They're hungry. People trust too easily. They don't look at the details. I do. Details matter. That's what I'm good at. It has to look completely believable. It has to look familiar. This is where research is written in the voice of the boss. It's what he would say if he were writing this.
What about the malware itself? How does that work?
Somebody else out there already wrote all the code that does the actual attack. I'm just using it in the attachment. My skill is in my ability to get a bunch of people to click on that attachment. I always wonder what it's like when the whole thing unfolds on their end, when the panic sets in.
Please leave your message after the beep.
Hey, this is Rajiv in finance. Call me as soon as you get this. Something's up with my laptop. I can't.
Katie, are you on your way into the office? Something's going on with our file servers.
Karen in HR, our benefits dashboard seems really slow. We're getting calls from users on it. Give me a call when you get this. Joining conference now.
Apparently, there's a malware attack targeting our main...
It's Ransomware.
Mark,
big problem. The ransomware was just to distract us. They got inside. They got everything. Customer data, financials, everything.
Qualicart is reeling today from the news that hackers have released the personal information of nearly
The
2
Nasdaq
million
closed
customers.
lower today, led by Qualicart, which was down 14% on news that the recent data breach may be far worse than the company
Its stock
originally
fell to a
acknowledged.
new all-time low on news that CEO Mark Hanning is stepping down after what is turning out to be one of the worst breaches of personal information in recent history.
Do you feel bad about releasing the personal information? All the financials? All the money that was lost?
All I did was get the files. I'm not the one that decided to release them. I'm not the one that shorted the stock. Somebody else had their reasons for that. It's above my pay grade. I was paid to do a job, and I did it well. And that's what's expected of anyone, isn't it? Anyway, markets bounce back.
So that's an example of social engineering being used, and misdirection being used to install malware, and with the consequences that you see before you. It's interesting with ransomware. It's actually taken a bit of a hit this year, and there's a couple of possible reasons for that. One is the volatility of Bitcoin, because of course Bitcoin isn't worth what it was last Christmas. Nobody knows quite where to set the ransoms in Bitcoin at the moment, apparently. So there you go. It's an ill wind, etc. And the second thing is, because we had these big attacks last year in the UK, WannaCry was the big one, which took down the National Health Service or parts of it. Again, that has raised the awareness of the issues. And as Jerry said, you can get into this game for very little. The nice lady sitting at the counter of Starbucks with her cheapo laptop could just be hacking. Who knows? But this is where we are. And I want to ask everyone, really, do you feel that there's a tension between the freedom of the individual and the feeling that people have that they should be able to do whatever they like in cyberspace with the needs of security, whether it's corporate, national, or indeed international? I mean, maybe Dobran, you could comment on this.
Yeah, so we implemented the NIS directive into our legislation, and you believe me or not that we have a huge struggle between the agencies and ministries. What about the privacy and how to hold data in the system for 6 months to trace the criminals, whatever, and we didn't succeed. So it's on us how much privacy and how much security we would like to have, and what system we would like to build. I'm always saying that we don't have any issues that Google, Facebook, whatever, it's tracing us, and we're saying, yes, agree. We have issues that government is doing security on us. And usually they're not stealing information, they're not usually using that information, they just want to protect the people and society. And we are always against that. So, and it's always, struggle between also when I'm back home, I would like to have privacy. I don't want that anyone interfere in my life. But at the end of the day, without security and about the controlling and having data and controlling the system, you cannot provide security.
The Estonian experience, please.
I want to make 2 comments here. First, there have been so many articles and news pieces about ransomware or different other cyber attacks or these threat vectors, that if there are still these major companies that do not have proper backups, that have not invested into their cybersecurity, well, I mean, wake up, please. I mean, how many times do we need to have this alarm clock on? I mean, this is quite frustrating me. But in terms of this individual freedom and using internet, there's one case that bothers me a bit in Estonia, and that is that some schools have now banned smart devices. That the kids at school cannot use their phones, or they cannot have phones at schools or tablets or whatsoever. But at the same time, they will go home afterwards and they will use these devices. I would argue that the role of the school here would be to educate the kids how to use these devices and how to use them securely. I mean, you just cannot fight them. I mean, these are our part of our daily lives right now. So, and this is one of these ways how you can create this understanding of responsibility for cyber hygiene within the whole society.
Uzi, in Israel, do people have a greater acceptance of the need to exchange privacy for security?
Yes. No, but I'd like to explain. First of all, it's a derivative. It's an outcome of the national culture and the fact that Israel still, after 70 years, is still a small enclave in an ocean of animosity. So I would say that this question you have raised or have asked regarding the issue of privacy is, I would say, a partial or a part of I would say, the dilemma one should have or one has in these special circumstances between life and quality of life. Now, I'm not saying that we are used to or there is any kind of legislation permitting, for instance, the police to penetrate into your own privacy and enter your email for no justified reason. But if, for instance, there is a wave of terrorism, we had this like 2 years ago, instigated, perpetrated, operated, I would say, mostly on the net, then yes, this is justified. That some people would be, or some people activities on the net would be spied upon, and some potential suicide bombers action would be prevented. I think all in all, this is not even a compromise, this is a good preference.
Is this something that you're looking at from an academic point of view, Mattia? Are these discussions which you're having?
There are many discussions we have. So mostly I would say that usually people are saying, this is it's a threat and somebody is spying on me. But we have to agree about that we are becoming a part of a whole. So we are not disconnected anymore. I mean, you can certainly throw everything away and go to live in the woods, but this is not the comfortable life you want to have. So there is a trade-off. There's always a trade-off. The fact is that people are, if there is a good offer, then you will say, okay, yes, I accept. If the offer is not good, then you will not say that. Now, the problem, of course, is on the other side, which goes down into the education and to how people are aware of what each click actually means, and we don't do that. So, as we discussed already, several people said that kids in the school are completely different than us, and they don't have awareness about these threats. And eventually, we haven't been educated in schools that were preaching collaboration and sharing, and these kids are doing that. So it's a completely different world, and we don't accept that because we think that, certainly they have to follow our own ideas and our own history. So there are several things we have to take into account, and certainly what is missing is this complete vertical of not just education, but creating awareness about the behavior on the cyber world, and to teach kids to understand what would that mean, or the future citizen, what would that mean. I mean, any of you probably got an invitation on LinkedIn and Facebook, and which is a famous person, director of this and that, and then you just scroll down a little bit and you see that the page was generated just an hour ago, and there were 2 friends there. So there are things which you have to be aware of, understand how this works, and then and then you are pretty sure that this is something that is a scam. And usually all the breaches and all the threat, everything that goes on is actually based on human behavior. It's not about the system.
Kai, you are involved with the Charter of Trust initiative. How does this play into that? Your mic, please.
The initial question was do we need to compromise freedom for security, right? If I remember correctly.
Or is there a tension between individual freedoms and the need for security?
And I believe that if we get security right, you might actually have more freedom in the end. That's the way we need to see it. In the end, security is anyways, on an individual level, security is a feeling, it's a perception. If we now were to turn off the light here in this room, your level of security would go down. Nothing has changed apart from the light. But you would probably feel a little bit more insecure because something's going on that you cannot explain. And we have to live, as security practitioners, I think we have to accept that security is also a little bit of a feeling. So it's on this feeling level. Now, why am I saying that? Because if we only think about security as something that we can control and that we can guarantee, that's the wrong approach. The world will be so complex, it already is, you cannot control everything. It's virtually impossible. So let's not try to even do it. The ways we have to do is by different measures. Some parts we have to control, and some other parts, on a conscious decision, we have to say, okay, this is something we cannot control, or we don't want to control because the cost of controlling that would be too high. It's called risk management in our company. So we need to rely also on a certain level of trust, and that's what we're trying to advocate with our initiative. That's why it's called Charter of Trust and not Charter of Cybersecurity. Because we're saying we need to rely, in a digital world, you need to rely on a certain level of trust, and that needs to be earned by the different companies, jointly maybe with the governments, and the governments can exert a certain level of control, but they cannot control everything. The rest needs to be filled with trust. And believe it or not, but in the end, we will all have to rely on trust, because yes, I can control my passwords for my personal email account, but if you're sitting on a plane, there's a lot of things you don't have under your control that you just have to rely on. See British Airways, but even more see the manufacturer of the operator of the airplane. If they don't get their cybersecurity right, you have a problem, but you cannot do anything about it. So you will have to trust, and that's something we also have to put into context when we think about digital literacy. So certain things are under your control, that's your responsibility, and there's others that aren't, and we have to think about how to control the things we can control and how to establish trust where we can establish trust, and that's what we're trying to do with the initiative.
I know Dovran wants to come back in a second. I just hear what Antonio wanted to say, because Antonio did just want to chip in there.
Well, security is always a trade-off between collective control and individual freedom. I mean, the ingredients and the mix may vary over space, over time, depending on circumstances, but that is always the case. Only in cyberspace, the effect is exponential. And because, for instance, it's an area in which the monopoly of force by public authorities doesn't really exist, because we all have force at our disposal. We are all armed. It is impossible to have any form of arms control in cyberspace, and therefore there are genuine challenges there that are very, very difficult to handle. We had a meeting last week with some people from Symantec coming from the West Coast, and they told us that they are increasingly hiring psychologists, because a better understanding of human behavior on the web is essential also for devising the kind of antivirus software that they need to that effect. And I would suggest, if you feel like reading it, I had the opportunity to read recently a book by one of these cyber psychologists. Her name is Mary Atkin. She's Irish, and she wrote a book titled The Cyber Effect that is very accessible. It's not for geeks. She also assisted in the production of a TV series called CSI Cyber, which is not particularly good, but it is interesting. And of course, the most appalling things in that book are about the peculiarity of behavior on cyberspace related to the presumption of anonymity and the propensity to take risks. And the category of population that is most vulnerable to that effect is adolescents. And there are chapters and chapters on adolescents on the web that I suggest you, especially if you have children in your family, to read, because it is really striking. And therefore the need for education and starting at a very early age is essential.
Dobro.
Very short. You talk about trust, and I think it's right. It's trust. But it's trust to the government that will protect you, and you have to be honest with the government. So how many companies do you have in your country or in Slovenia that they never reported that somebody steals something from them? They never reported. It was a robbery, They took $1 million or whatever euros, and they never reported that because they didn't have trust, or they said, hey, it doesn't matter. So I'm asking you, if somebody is stealing a car from your garage, do you call somebody? No, probably not. That's the point that we have to change. We have to have trust in both sides. So trust the government and report that, and do that system that we are trusting each other.
A quick response, please, Kai.
Yeah, that's the funny part, because control doesn't create trust, but trust can create control. That's the way, that's the line of thinking we have to change.
I know that Tanel wants to get in, but I want to make sure that two other panelists who we haven't heard from yet get the chance to chip in. Jerry, you've been nodding affirmatively at a lot of what's been said here. What have you got to add?
Something I read not too long ago, a book called Discipline Equals Freedom. And when you start actually getting into a disciplinary process of doing a standard workout routine at a certain time, it frees up the rest of your day, so you're not worrying about doing that workout later on in the day. The same thing comes with the security and processes that we take for making sure that the apps and stuff that we're downloading are secure. The processes that we use as a company, that we make sure that everything is locked in, so then everything else is wide open, that we can do whatever we wish during that time frame. So something to think about. If we do the discipline up front, everything else will take care of itself, and we'll actually have more time to focus on creating a new widget, creating a new application, creating a new whatever it takes to advance the company or advance the country. But we got to secure the devices first, put them into a secure enclave, and then move forward.
Thank you. Gregor, is this something which the young startups you work with, for example, is it something that they're prioritizing?
As I mentioned, they don't see security as a topic at all. So
how do you change that then, do you think?
They have to start earning money, which they could lose if something goes wrong. Let's say if they're exposed to legislation, some breach of data, they have to pay fees and penalties. In this case, they would protect themselves. Let's say now we have new laws in GDPR in Europe, which gives you the obligation that you have to keep the information about your clients, about the people that you're collecting. You have to keep it safe. You have to have the information who is accessing it, and everybody has the right to see where you have the information, what information have you gathered on them, and potentially delete, request the delete of the information, meaning that to some extent everybody of us is aware of that there is data around being collected, but not a lot of us are reacting to that. The companies realize that they will need to do something. They are doing actively something, but this is then giving an additional burden that you have to carry when you're trying to build some product. So it's a trade-off. Either you're being secure and you don't sell anything, so you will die off as a company, or you sell something and somewhere in the future will hit you with some fines, etc. But then this is then decision when to start to address the issues. So.
Thank you. Tanel.
Thank you. Just on privacy and security, a thought that is not new, and that actually our former president Thomas Hendrik Gilves said it out that yes, somebody might know my blood type. Well, I've given certain data somewhere, but what the heck? I mean, it doesn't matter really. What matters here is if somebody starts changing my blood type in certain system. So it's about the data integrity. And on trust, it is definitely the role of the government to build up this trust. And in Estonia, I mean, we have a joke that you can do anything online in terms of interaction with the government, except one thing, that is getting married. And that is basically true. Yeah. So how the government has built in the trust is that a lot of my data is being used by the government, but at any given moment I can go and check who at what point has accessed my data. And if this is unlawful access, I can immediately set a complaint, and there will be remedies after that.
And can I just have a show of hands along the panel? Because we've got about 10 minutes for questions after this, so we're doing reasonably well, I think. But I did want a quick show of hands, because I know this is something which concerns various members of the panel. In your interactions with politicians, when you're trying to explain to them the importance of cyber defense, cyber security, do they get it? A quick show of hands. Do they get it? Yes? Oh, there's one. Antonio. Thank you. Very, very, very positive, Antonio.
They get it now.
They get it now.
What has happened with WannaCry and NotPetya last year, for what happened in the United States presidential campaign in 2016, and risk happening in the French presidential campaign last year. I think now political leaders are aware of the threats that exist for the economic activity in their own countries, business, public services, but also for the integrity of political systems at the national level. And that is something that brings together populists who want to take back control and also the traditional liberal democratic forces.
And is this fair to say other people on the panel have a slightly more frustrating interaction with politicians, or are you getting better?
I have to admit, probably it's not just the politicians, it's also the managers in our company. It's the people in our company, it's our customers, it's our suppliers, it's our competitors. We all have a lot to learn. That's why I would say maybe there's not even anything like getting it in the end. You would always have to, I mean, we all agree that we have to find somehow new approaches, and probably we don't have, and nobody here has the one and only answer to it. That's why it's so hard to get. And we also need to realize that we might have to change our language talking about cybersecurity, because in the past it was a little bit esoteric. It was a small group of cybersecurity professionals, at least in a company, and also I think on a nation level, that was among themselves. Now that Meta is prominent enough to be hosted here on a strategic forum, which doesn't even read anything about security, right? It's a strategic matter. That's why we need to change the language, because everybody needs to talk about it, or at least understand the basics. And that goes beyond awareness. Not saying, yeah, of course cybersecurity is important and then moving on, but saying cybersecurity is important, and now I feel obliged to think about what can I do in my organization, in my sphere of influence, to do something about it. That's the moment we have to achieve, and I don't think we're there yet.
Okay. Well, I will open the floor for questions. I hope we have some. If we don't, we can certainly carry on talking. Yes, please.
Yeah. Do I need a microphone or?
We have the technology. This is a cybersecurity forum. You just better hope the microphone hasn't been hacked.
Hi. Thank you. Antonio, I have a question for you. In your article for Bliss Strategic Times, you mentioned that NATO allies have acknowledged now that the cyber attacks can get to a level where you could possibly reach the threshold, which could possibly refer to the possible involvement of Article 5 of the invocation of Article 5 of the Washington Treaty. Now, my question is, if the attribution for cyber attacks is so difficult, as this panel has mentioned, then where does that lead us? What if that invocation does at some point happen, and how do we actually respond to that?
Yep, please, go ahead, Antonio.
I think that nobody has decided to define a threshold for calling Article 5. And I think, personally speaking, that is a wise decision, because it's always unwise to indicate a red line because it represents a target and a point of reference for any possible attack at great effect. I think, of course, the challenge of attribution does exist, but there also is increasing practice of consulting among allies, especially those with adequate capabilities to effect in terms of forensics, in terms of intelligence assessment, in order to assess who is behind something. And of course, the interesting thing about this is the more sophisticated the attack, the less numerous the potential culprits are, because you need a certain level of capabilities that is very often related to state capabilities or near-state capabilities in order to perpetrate an attack that can be very harmful. But I think it is important in terms of strategic communications and messaging that, I mean, we are saying that that could amount to, but we are not saying what exactly would amount to. And I think that sort of keeping the potential adversary guessing is part of the deterrence effect of that deliberation.
Jerry, would you go along with that?
Yes, I would. And also one of the things too to think about is that primarily a lot of Article 5 has to do with the defense. So bringing in other countries and stuff to support and build up the defenses of that country, and also to level set the other countries within NATO to make sure that everybody is up at a much higher strategic security posture would also make a big difference. The other question that I run into, though, because we've been dealing with this for some time now, is if we do a counterstrike, who is in charge of that counterstrike? How is that going to be done? Is it in kind? Is it massive steel on target? Or is it just to take down their power for one day? What does that look like? Right now, nobody really knows. We have some concepts that we've been playing with in the sandbox and stuff, but we really don't have a good understanding of response in kind when it comes to that.
Thank you, Jerry. Any more questions?
I'd like to do permission to add something.
Oh, yes, sure, please do, Izzy. If we can get the microphone over there while you're answering.
I'd like to say something, or to add up something regarding attribution and deniability. Attribution and deniability are two sides of the same coin. I mean, you have difficulties in attribution because there are certain deniability capabilities. What I would like to say, this is like a pessimistic kind of a forum and panel because we see.
I said it was going to be fun.
Right. What I would like to say, and this might be at least the only encouraging message I've been hearing all throughout the last 65 or 70 minutes, that the thing about attribution and deniability, there is a certain threshold which, if an event or an exchange takes place and it surpasses this threshold, there is no difficulty in attribution and no deniability, or no capability for deniability. The challenge we have is with all this chain or cluster of events which are beneath the threshold that would put some serious services and capabilities into action. When the NHS was attacked, this was like 18 months ago, 19 months ago, at the beginning it was thought to be a criminal act because this was ransomware and this was blackmail and extortion and Bitcoin. And it took several services, 3, maybe 4 weeks to see that these are the North Koreans, and this is a specific group called Lazarus, if I recall their name. So what I'm saying is that above a certain threshold, if NSA, GCHQ, 8200, these level of services or agencies come into action, there is no deniability issue.
Thank you, Izzy.
One real quick thing to follow on with that is that you're 100% correct. What I was looking at is when a company is attacked, when you have a small company or even a large company that is attacked, say Siemens is attacked either in Germany or in Mexico or exactly some other location besides its headquarters, who within that organization is that then bubbled up to the military? And with your question in regards to Article 5, then how does that bubble back up to the headquarters in Germany, and could Germany then call that because it took down their multi-billion-dollar company? So those are what we're trying to struggle with. But you're correct in regards to when it comes to a high-level, sophisticated attack that's able to take down things, there are certain signatures within that we can definitely identify where the source was.
Thank you, Jerry. Okay, we do have that question now. Have you got the microphone?
No, but maybe a question. It's not related directly to the data storage and protection, but actually to the access and contents on the web and internet as such. We've been working here now on the European.
Hi, better. We've been working now on the European finance project called MATES, and we were actually trying to make a counter-narrative on the propaganda on radicalism, terrorism, etc. And we were actually surprised how much of that content was actually accessible without any problems. Propaganda contents to young people, to everyone, and actually first last year in 2017, Facebook and other Google and other companies started to block the contents. So how could this be prevented or maybe done earlier? Because it was actually, our project was 2 years, and during the 2 years the contents were very, very accessible. Thank you.
I think maybe Dobran might have a view on that.
Yeah, always tough questions. So it's a great question, and probably you just check on the surface web, yeah, and 90% of that what you talked about, it's on the dark web. It's even on the dark web that we have a hard time to access and to see what's going on there. So it's easy for the terrorists, for the criminals to access dark and deep and dark web. So I think that all Facebook, Google, all institutions, the governmental institutions should fight that and should sign like kind of a agreement that they will prevent posting that content on the net. And we all have to fight that like ecosystem, reporting that and reporting and preventing that can happen. But it's still majority of that is in dark and deep web where we don't have a lot of clue what's going on. Even with the offensive methods there, it's really hard to get to the content there.
Kai, Gregor, would you be willing to sign up to such a thing?
Well, the way we look at this, not being in a company that's in social media or in media at all, so I could say, okay, it's not really touching us too much as a company. As an individual, of course, it does. But what touches us as a company is that on the dark web and on the web, you would also not just find these kind of news or propaganda or fake news, but you would also find, and you touched upon it, Gregor, weapons, cyber weapons, basically, tools that allow you to, off the shelf, do your own botnet or ransomware attack. And you've seen this, it's a job. Huh? So that is also frightening. We limit the availability of weapons. At least here in Europe we do. There's other countries that see it differently. But that is something we control. But on the web that doesn't happen. So it can be a job. Maybe there's even a panel happening somewhere else where they're on the bad side of things discussing how they can increase the collaboration on these kind of things. Huh? Why not? It's a business. It's a business model. You see, they're making good money with it. That is the frightening thing. That's a little bit more what, from Siemens' perspective, frightens us from a personal perspective. Of course, I'm totally on your side. It's frightening that this is available, and yeah, well, probably we will have to live with it for a certain amount of time, increasingly.
Talking about time, Gregor, if you keep this one short, we'll have time for one more brief question.
Maybe just to touch the fake news. So, with the explosion of information with the web, so we have to be much more critical how do we perceive the information that we are gathering. So why do we see something and what is the purpose that it was presented to us? So maybe we have to be a little bit more vigilant regarding that. And as my colleague said, yes, today you can buy a lot of stuff online. The problem is that you don't even have to buy. So the kids, they have a lot of time. 12 years old, they say, oh, darknet, how do I get it? So it's a 5-minute job, you're on the dark web, you're surfing there for hours, your parents are at work.
There's a reason that our computer
and then
is in the
they're
living
just
room.
playing, you know? And they say, ooh, I can buy a database of MasterCards.
Well, that's time for that last question. Have you got the mic? If we could keep this one concise, we'll be hopefully able to get an answer before we wrap.
All right, I'll try and do that. So my name is Alexis Biller. I'm representing a company called Tolkien, a blockchain company. I'm actually quite curious, Dublin, maybe you can answer this, and maybe this is a useful one for the panel just to give an input on. I've helped businesses with information assurance maturity models. So I've helped them understand their risks, respond to it, mitigate it. But it's easier in businesses because you know who the person working for you are, you know who your partners are, you've got some control. But in the citizen side of my life, our lives, we appreciate frictionless environments. We assume somebody is looking out for us. We think that there is a pastoral sort of government there who will help us. But we also want to just access things just like that. I remember I went playing football in Belgium. I used to be asked for identity card, check studs, and they wanted to check insurance. But they also wanted to check I didn't do harm for anyone. But I relinquished this data because I also wanted to play. I wanted to access the service, and also I didn't want to be harmed by others. So this was kind of, I accepted some things. In these interactions in life, How can we set that norm in the world for citizens to access services and feel at ease?
Well, this is going to have to be the mother of all 3,000 please.
Next question, please.
Yeah. Does Mitya have something to say to this? Because I'm conscious we haven't come to you on the Q&A so far. I think it's from a philosophical point of view.
It's a philosophical point of view, yeah. I mean, you know, usually it's like, so this is a very dynamic world. So the cyber is very dynamic, and we are trying to fight dynamic with rigidity. So that's a problem. So, for example, why don't we think about a business model or value-added model that would, you know, reward counterfeiters on the other side? So having something which would be the same tool, the same environment, but, you know, the good guys. So there are things we usually, you know, this is